Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion, and as you can tell from the upload date in the title there, October is once again upon us, so it is now time for horror-themed movie reviews. Now we're starting with a film that I had not seen up to this point, but thanks to memes and TikTok, I had seen a lot of clips of, and based on the fact this has a sequel, I didn't know if it was from this or the sequel, but having now watched this, I could say with all honesty, it seems to be all from this one. It, of course, is the film that introduced more people to Art the Clown. That is from 2016, directed, written, and with special effects by Damien Leone. It is Terrifier. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying that this film is both hindered and aided by its small budget. Now, it's both a gift and a curse, and when I say small budget, I mean small budget. According to IMDb, the budget for this film was $35,000, which, just to put that in perspective, that's $20,000 more than what I got when we all sold the house. And that's about the same amount. That's just a little bit less than what all three of the brothers would have gotten after we sold the house, just to put that in perspective. We could have financed this movie, I mean, even accounting for inflation. Although it did make a decent penny, even when Hollywood accounting, it made money. It made over $300,000, which is not a lot compared to other low-budget horror movies, but it's still a nice little turnout for its budget. Now, it's helped by the fact that Damien does show his creativity in a lot of the scenes, but it is hurt because there are moments where you can definitely tell that there wasn't a lot of money, like certain shots. You can tell certain ways that the camera's framed for the location. You can kind of tell. And of course, there's the acting, but in a lot of horror movies, that kind of comes with the territory. But here, you'll notice a little bit more, but I'll comment on that later. Now, another big complaint there seems to be could happen with any film regardless of budget, but that's the two ways it does do that. But even with it, Damien did show his creativity, so I got to give him props there. Now, as a lot of you know, I'm not 100% against remakes, but I think the issue that arises is when you start remaking every property, especially when all you're doing is copy-paste and not putting any creativity or any love into the project, starts to get diminishing returns. And this is more prevalent when it comes to horror remakes. You start basically pulling up corpses out of the ground. That's the issue that arises. I mean, probably the more recent Halloween series kind of shows that, to where it's not really a remake, but it's going into the ground, into that well, another way, and that is doing legacy sequels. And then, of course, other series are doing that, to where it's like, yeah, they're not making as much money as they could have. Now, with horror movies, more so the slasher subgenre, we haven't really had a lot of icons in that genre in a long time. I mean, every now and then we'll get a horror icon that will stand out, but it's not going to be as enduring as the past ones, but because that's the past. It's just like with westerns. You're not going to get anybody that makes their name just doing westerns anymore. Like, you're not going to have another John Wayne or another Clint Eastwood, where they're known specifically for that. Just like that with the slasher films, you're not going to get like icon after icon anymore. You're just going to get one that stands out. You know, unless we have another slasher renaissance like the 80s, but, you know, I think the odds of that are a little slim. But with art, it seems like we are getting another icon, even if it's more in the cult way. So hopefully when it comes to these films, that's a nice little step in the right direction, and it shows that you can actually make these type of horror films and be successful without having to constantly dig up the Michael Myers and the Ghostface of the world and keep dragging those series out until it's basically like, oh, here comes Old Man Myers. How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man? Now, with art, you can definitely tell that Damien was inspired by what came before and tried to interpret it and do his own thing with it. Because even though they don't really comment on it until the end, art like Jason, Freddy, and a little bit of Michael, depending on which series you're looking at, there is definitely something supernatural about him, because like a lot of the slasher people, he survives a good amount of damage, and then at the end, you can tell he's going to be back for more. And of course, the whole thing with the clown is interesting, which we'll talk about that. Now, if there's one part about this that's weak, other than, you know, the budget kind of hindering some of the movie stuff in place, it's the story. But it is a basic type of story, and you can tell that it's very basic just to try to stretch out the story that originated as a short film into a feature length. And you could probably hindered a little bit by the amount of money they were able to scram up, but for what it is, it does allow for the film to get you from A to B to Z, all strapping across a bunch of scenes. It's not the most in-depth one, but for the slasher genre, it works. It just could have probably gone through another draft or two. And it's very basic. Takes place on Halloween. It opens with an interview with a victim who survived Art the Clown, which this is a minor spoiler that we find out at the end. This is actually technically, when you go by chronological order, the last scene in the film. I almost said last film in the scene. It's the last scene in the film. So we're seeing who survived Art's rampage. Then it goes back to the beginning of the night. It takes place on Halloween. We're introduced to who we think are going to be our lead characters, and one of them potentially be the final girl. They're Tara and Dawn, played by Jenna Kanell and Catherine Corcoran, if I'm pronouncing that right. They have done other stuff. Gina was in Renfield this year, which is another film we're going to see in this little series. And Catherine played a murder victim in The Lovely Bones. Yeah, they're going around, they're enjoying their Halloween night. We don't see a lot of it, obviously, budget reasons. They see Art, they're a little freaked out by him. They end up going to a pizzeria, and Art comes in, and this is, of course, where we get that one famous shot of Art where he's like, all that. Now, even without the opening scene, for context, if you were to not see that scene, this is the part where you get to see that there's something weird about Art. One, he's not talking, which I think adds to his creepiness. You know, kind of the same way that Michael is creepy because he doesn't talk, but him, it's a different way because you don't see his face at all because of the mask, so it makes it creepy in a different way here, even though it's covered with makeup and even though it's prosthetics for the actor, but we're led to believe it's his actual face covered in makeup. See his mouth a little bit, you can see his eyes. It's creepy because of what he's wearing, the cultural subconscious fear of clowns. The fact he's not colorful, he's not talking, all that adds together with that weird smile where you're like, there's something weird about Art here. And of course, the character of Tara really is getting that vibe from him. And of course, he just sitting there looking at her, which also adds to it, especially when he's not really smiling. He goes over to the little coin machine. You know, you put a coin in, get a prize, gets a ring, puts it on her finger, and then he goes to the bathroom. We don't actually see what he does in there before he gets thrown out, but later on when someone's cleaning it up, we can tell he did something with crap in there, so it makes you wonder, did he take a big crap in there and then start flinging it around, or was there already stuff in there and he started playing with it? Good thing we didn't need to see that, because just seeing the aftermath, I'm like, okay, I did not really need to see that. And it's after this that he starts killing people. He kills both people that work at the pizzeria. He then starts stalking Tara and Dawn. And there's some tension in these scenes. This is where you can see that Damien is an effective filmmaker, but here, definitely, even with the budget, he does handle it pretty well. And I think one of his strengths in this film, despite its budget, is some of his camera work. Like when Tara is hiding from Art around the cars, I feel there's some good tension there. I mean, probably in points the editing at points could be a little bit tighter, but it is very effective. And this is definitely where Gina plays Tara, where you're like, okay, I definitely feel for her. Now, of course, you probably guess from what I'm saying, they eventually get killed off. Dawn is one of the two big kills in the movie, and it's the one you actually do see. And that, of course, is the saw death. Which, this is another moment where you can kind of tell that the budget did hurt it a little bit, because with one shot you can definitely tell, oh, that prop doesn't look as good as it could have been. But for $35,000, I'm like, okay, I could forgive it a little bit. I mean, it's still effective, especially with how it's edited and shot. And it is that Dawn is hung upside down. Art gets the saw. And I have to say, right at the beginning, I already knew where he was going, and I was anticipating it. And I think it was that combined with the first couple shots of it, where he takes the saw and starts cutting her down the groin, and then goes all the way down to her head. By the time he got into her chest, I had kind of gotten over it and was like, ooh, this is all visceral. So just, like, look at all that blood. But those first couple shots, it kind of felt like how my buddy Ephraim feels when he talks about a certain scene from Mutilator. If you know, you know. If you don't, it's a scene where the killer uses one of those old hook things and takes it to a woman's, and you actually see the whole tear thing. And of course that movie obviously had a slightly higher budget, and the way it's shot's a little bit more effective, but here it's like, yeah, no, I know what my buddy felt like, yeah. And of course it's like, that's a very creative kill, and I have to give Damien some props here, that he actually thought of something that we don't really see too often in horror films, I mean, for obvious reasons, but her being upside down, I think, added to the unsettling nature of it, and apparently that comes from medieval torture. And while he was doing the script, Damien actually read books about medieval torture for inspiration, and of course he looked into that, found it, like, just got to figure out a way to throw it in. And of course it also just shows how much of a sadistic fuck Art the Clown is, that he goes that far back to it. I guess it makes him look more like an evil jester. And of course he starts stalking Tara again once she gets out, kills a couple of the characters around her. The other infamous kill scene we don't actually see on camera, and that's when he takes out the cat lady, played by Hoya Moseni, if I'm pronouncing that name correctly, who also played Jenna Kanell in Law & Order SVU. Now with the cat lady, you think it's going to be all nice, like, oh, he's gonna be nice, but then he comes on camera later, he's all naked for the most part, but then has her body on, which is like, oh, he skinned her alive. Now obviously if they had more money you might have actually seen it, but I think it's a little bit more unsettling to just imagine how it went and see the aftermath of the whole theater of the mind. It's just one of those things, like, yeah. Now Art starts stalking Tara's sister Victoria, played by Samantha Scaffidi, who we all knew was going to come into the film because earlier Tara had called her to get a ride, and the whole Chekhov scum thing, you don't show something unless it's going to happen, so you know that she's going to come into the film at one point, especially if you're watching the timer, see how much is left in the film. You don't got about 25 minutes left in the film when a character comes in and them not be it. So Victoria is our final girl. She does deal with Art and running from him and all that, and of course part of her thing leads to that one scene of Art in the car, which has become TikTok famous by putting Slipknot music over it. God, cut me up, as he's rocking out in the car and then getting out. I figured, like, yeah, it's not going to be heavy metal music, but the way that David Howard Thornton, Art's actor, moves around, it does lend itself to heavy metal. It's more like jazzy, older type music that he's listening to, which I also think fits Art, and it adds a little bit of humor to the scene, especially if you see the scene after seeing the TikToks. And of course she does get saved by a little bit, but you could consider a deus ex machina, but it is the cops. They were contacted earlier in the film, like I said, Chekhov's gun. They show up. Now they don't get to shoot Art directly, he actually takes himself out, and this is one thing I think that makes Art stand out against some of the other more traditional slashers, where they always use knives of some kind. I mean, you'll get some occasions they'll use a gun, but they don't usually use them successfully. They usually threaten. I think of the Scream villains when I think of that. I guess you could say a little bit of Perkins from Deadly Dreams, but that's more because he's a hunter. But his most memorable death scenes in that film were more with the hunting knife. Now, the thing about Art is that earlier you think, oh, he's going to try and pull out another type of knife, but no, he pulls out a gun and he shoots her with it. It's like, okay, that makes his point. Art's not fucking around there. And of course he offs himself with the gun. I know that's a spoiler, but if I bring up the cops, I got to bring up the fact that he gets out of there. Of course leads to the or is it type ending a lot of these slashers have. Of course, if you go to this film now, you know there's Terrifier 2, so you know that ending is going to pay off. And I do plan on reviewing Terrifier 2 right after this. Now the fun thing is that they're both on separate streaming services. Terrifier 2 is on Amazon Prime, whereas Terrifier 1 is on Peacock. So if you have both of those streaming services, you can watch both of them. I do not know if I would recommend one over the other. I would say Terrifier is definitely worth at least one watch just for curiosity's sake. I could say it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. Personally, I don't know if I will watch the entire movie again. I'll probably get it in my collection just for collection's sake, because I wouldn't really mind owning it just to show it off occasionally. And also if I want to, get a good rip copy of those scenes for editing. If there's one strong suit after the direction, which there's another shot I didn't talk about that is excellent, and that is the hiding in the I don't know if it's a closet or if it's one of those portable closets areas things you used to see in schools. But this one's made of wood, where one of the girls is hiding in it. You see her eyeball, you see her point of view. It's an excellent point of view shot. Now some might say it's a little hampered by money because all you see is out through the peephole, but I think that adds to the tension. Now, after the direction, if there's any other strong suit, it is obviously David Howard Thornton as Art the Clown. Now, other than this, as of the big roles, he played an orderly in Gotham. I haven't really watched Gotham, so I couldn't comment. He's not the original actor that played Art the Clown in the Terrifier short, and of course All Hallows Eve, where that short was put in. He was played by Michael Gialini, if I'm pronouncing that right. It looks Italian. And apparently he stepped down because he didn't really like the makeup times, which I can kind of get, especially since the makeup times would be different for a feature-length film. He was the 6th person who auditioned for Art, and part of the reason he got it is he has mime training, which he added to it, which definitely helps Art feel unsettling because of how he's acting with his body language. But he was doing an audition. He's mime tasting his victim's blood. What cinched the role for him was that he added salt to improve the taste. It's one of those little things you're like, we got him. Now, Thornton describes Art as an evil Mr. Bean, and there are a lot of moments where I can kind of get that vibe from it. I don't know if that's how he describes him after the film, after he did everything, or reading the script and having seen the short, he feels this is what works for him. So combined with his mime training and the script dictation, there it goes. And he was also inspired by several silent actors and several physical actors. We got Charlie Chaplin in there, we got Buster Keaton, Lon Chaney. I definitely feel Lon Chaney in there. I haven't seen a lot of Chaney's roles, but from what little I've seen, I could definitely feel Chaney in there. And if you're going to draw from any silent film actor for a horror role, you got to go with the man of 1,000 faces. Of course, for physical modern day, we got Doug Jones, which of course, that's a name everybody probably knows. And then of course Jim Carrey. Now Jim is a very physical actor, but he does it with words, but it's one of those things that, like, if Jim was born in the silent era, he probably would have killed it with how physical his body language could get. There's a few times where you can definitely feel that, more so the infamous moment. Now, I do got some interesting trivia here. Now, the pizza parlor that was used for the film closed in 2017, and it was Andy's Deer Hills Pizzeria in Deer Park, New York. Now, originally it was written to be a burger joint, but Damien changed it when he found out that his 2 actresses were vegetarian. I mean, I don't remember if they had like the alternative meat stuff back then, or if it was popular back in 2016. But nowadays they could have still gotten through with it and just had them order the alternative stuff, order something that's more vegan. But a pizzeria, vegetarian. And now I'm getting a call from New York. Ooh. I guess it's the person that heard and like, where's my money for mentioning the name of my place? Now, but of course, them being vegetarian, it's easier. Just get a cheese pizza. Now, during a break in filming, Thornton noticed 2 women were arguing on the streets. Now, he waved at them in full makeup to freak them out. Could you imagine that, arguing, all of a sudden you guys notice a weird, strange clown just waving at you, even if it's just like... Thornton saw his opportunity and he went with it. Now, while they were filming the scene where Tara is tied up in the chair, Gina insisted on remaining tied up in between takes just to help with her psychology for her character. And I can see it a little bit. I mean, the acting of the characters is definitely not the strongest suit. There's a lot of moments where you're like, is that the best take they had? they only have enough room for one take. But definitely her physical acting when she's in the chair, to a point I believe it. I mean, you can kind of tell the chair isn't the best because of the budget, but I'd say that for the budget and all that, yeah, it's believable. I mean, with the budget as it is, you kind of got to go halfway with the film suspension of disbelief and add a little bit of theater suspension of disbelief in there, but lean more towards film. But just know, it's just like with a theater, you gotta know they had to do with the budget what they had. I already mentioned that. Now, there's one other interesting thing to mention about the director. And in this year, in April, he actually gave an interview about the film and mentioned some of the backlash, which, based on what I said, you could already tell there's going to be some criticism of the film. You know, like the characters not being the strongest, you know, outside art. Some people saying, well, art, well, he's interesting, he's not the best, which is like, he's probably one of the best things about the film. And like I mentioned at the beginning with horror characters and all that, definitely good to see another newish one coming up. And we know there's going to be more sequels, so Art's legacy is going to continue for a little bit longer. How much longer? Hard to tell. Well, some of them it's hard to tell once they hit the point where they're burning it in the ground until we actually get there, but we'll see. The murder scenes is where I'm going to talk about. You, as you can probably guess from how I described the Saw scene, it's probably going to make a lot of people feel uncomfortable. Now, the one thing that I didn't think about until I read this comment from Damien was some people saying that the way that the cat lady went was transphobic, which I'm like, what? Now, this is what he said about it. I get constantly accused of being misogynistic. Of course, today it's inevitable. I don't really get that vibe when it comes to a lot of horror films. Like, maybe people say The Final Girl is misogynistic, but I don't get it. What really shocked me was being called transphobic based on the scene where Art skins and Where's the Woman. It makes me laugh because it couldn't be any further away from what I am, raised by all women and everything. And that last one is just him throwing that in there. Is like, now some people might take that last one as him trying to do the whole, well, I'm not racist, I have black friends thing, but not really, because it's one of those things that if you are raised just by women and they're strong women, you'll have a more appreciation for strong women. Like even though there was a male presence in the household for my grandfather, basically both of my grandmothers were the ones that raised me. You know, they were strong women, and so I have an appreciation for strong women too. Yeah, probably why most of the people, ones I've been attracted to, have been strong, I guess you could say. But the fact that he's just skinning and wearing woman, that does not mean it's transphobic. This strikes me at people trying to read what they want to read into the scene and fuck everything else. I mean, it's just like them trying to say Ace Ventura nowadays is transphobic because of Einhorn. Because remember, Einhorn is Finkel. Finkel is Einhorn. But that, because of that whole thing, it's like that has nothing to do with trans. I mean, it's more a man exploiting the trans thing in order to get revenge. Whether or not he sees himself as a woman or just doing that just to try to get close to get his revenge, it's that. But it has nothing to do with the end gag. It has nothing to do with the end gang being transphobic. It's more Ace exposing who Einhorn really is. Finkel. Now, here it's just, really that has nothing to do with the scene at all. It's just Art being a weirdo after he skinned the lady. And just wearing her skin just to freak people out because he's a sick fuck. That's all there is to it. You know, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. In this case, it's just a cigar. There's nothing deeper to it other than him being a sick fuck. Well, there's not really much else I could comment on the film. No other trivia, no other parts of the movie to touch on that I haven't already touched on. Like I mentioned, it is at least worth one watch for curiosity's sake. So if you have Peacock, I'd say give it a watch there. If you happen to know someone that has it or come across it somewhere, give it a watch for curiosity's sake. Whether you'll end up liking this one and decide to skip, or hate it and decide to skip the sequel, I don't know. Like I said, I haven't seen the sequel at the time I'm recording this, so I don't know how that will hold up by comparison, but I have a feeling since it has a larger budget, at least from a mise en scène in look standpoint, it'll probably look better. But who knows, it might just be kind of more or less the same film, just with a higher budget, but in which case it might actually be better. in that case, we'll wait and see, because that will probably be the next horror film coming up the pipe. Until then, everybody.